Greetings and welcome to the Dangerous Gentleman podcast. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. Hey, so all of you who have started to listen and watch recently, I'd appreciate you liking the podcast, sharing with people, and getting my name out there. So I got to do the little podcast thing. And so now I'm going to introduce my guest today. We're going to do another interview. This is Mr. Andy Harris. Say hi to the folks.
Hey, how's it going? Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So Andy's got a really cool story. So we're actually going to dig into that a little bit, his story and how he got into the position that he's in, and just kind of a little bit about him. So we'll start with the 1 minute bio.
Yeah, 1 minute bio. I'll call it the Reader's Digest version, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah, it's interesting. About 3 years ago, I was actually just sharing this recently that God really brought me to my knees and to a rock bottom experience for me. I ended up getting asked to leave my home by my ex-wife, and when that happened, I ended up just running to the bars, running to anything to cope. I say it all the time, like I ran to alcohol, porn, food, anything that I could to cope because I didn't want to face any of the realities that were going on in my life. And it brought me to a point where I had my hands behind my back and was getting arrested and put in the back of a police car for a DUI. And at that moment, God really brought me to that rock bottom place where I was like, I can't believe that I'm actually sitting at a police station explaining what's going on and just realizing what had happened to my life. And I'd love to say that it switched in that instant. It took another couple months for things to shift, but that rock bottom experience really shaped me. And I ended up reaching out to some men on Twitter because I didn't want to talk to anybody in person at that point. And what it started to do was to shift things in my life in small ways, really back to just getting away from alcohol, getting away from coping, trying to make choices. And what I say is at that point, God was already moving, but I thought that I was making the choices for myself of what I needed to do. And that brought me to October of 2022, going to a word retreat, which is a local retreat in town, and surrendering back to Jesus. The whole retreat was about fathers and sons. Every story that we heard was about fathers and sons, and it just wrecked me because I have an 8-year-old boy who had to go through this whole process of divorce, and just the decisions that I made to destroy our marriage and not face the problems that we have and face the fears that we needed to face. And so when I started to hear those things, I was like, Lord, I just surrender. Like, I don't think that you can change anything in my life really at this point, but I surrender everything, like whatever you want to do. And in that moment, he reminded me of a time where when I came home drunk in December of 2022, where he said, I'm going to restore you to restore others. And I just started bawling because I'm drunk. I haven't heard from the Lord in forever. And when I surrendered back to him at that retreat a few months later, he said the same thing. He goes, I'm going to restore you to restore others. And it's time to get to work. And so he shifted the identity that I had and how I saw myself in that instant. But then he said, now we need to work into that identity so you can replace those lies with the truth of me. And as that started to happen, it shifted my identity. And so just to wrap it up here for the 1 minute, that's going to become 2 to 3 minute intro. I'm always a little longer. It's the way it goes.
Okay.
But as he shifted that identity, replaced those lies with truth, I was able to, lose 135 pounds, become free from porn and become free from the addiction of food and alcohol and be able to walk into this new identity and continue to walk in it each day. And that's really just through daily surrender and picking up my cross and walking with him. So I'll stop there and we'll just keep going.
All right. Well, so actually what I want to do is dig in a little bit before that to what led you up to that moment 3 years ago, because that's where most men are. Most men are not quite to most of us have to hit that rock bottom. So like, go back a little bit to like who you were before that led you to that place. Like, I'm not saying we got to dig it all the way into your childhood, but kind of just give a little idea of how you were brought up, your relationship with your dad, that kind of stuff, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, we can dig into the childhood. I think it has a huge impact on stuff. I think
It does. It does.
that's the piece as I look back, because my passion now, I was actually sharing a few weeks back, is my passion now is for that guy 6 years ago, not the guy 3 years ago, but the guy six
Yep.
years ago that doesn't even know he's on the path to rock bottom.
Yep.
And that's for me is I didn't even know I was on the path to rock bottom. Like I would say I had a pretty good childhood growing up, but there were some deep wounds that I had that I didn't even realize. And those things shaped my identity. Like I didn't think that I was worth it. I thought that who I was wasn't good. Like I'm a more emotional man. Like I definitely cry probably more than the average man and feel things deeply. And a lot of times I just felt like, man, I'm like a woman. Like, geez, like this is not okay. Like it's not okay for me. I can't be a leader. I can't be the man that I want to be, and that it just wasn't. But
Well,
it,
I would never mistake you for a woman. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And so, but that was my identity, right? Like I never knew how to live into who I was because I had these deep seated wounds that I didn't know how to let heal and how to walk into it and walk into fully who I believe that I am. And so those wounds from my child, like I still remember coming back from a trip in Wenatchee, a place close to us, and I was bawling because a girlfriend had just broken up with me, and my dad's like, "Hey, you just get over it, just move on." And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't understand how, like, I don't get it. And I just felt like I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't be the way that I am. And so I just masked it. Like I just learned how to hide any of the things that I had. And so it kind of taught me, and I learned that in church growing up, like how to hide things instead of how to actually walk towards Jesus, which is what it should be, is walking in freedom towards him, not walking in shame to try to do things the right way. And that's really what kind of led to a lot of the things in our marriage because I just didn't know who I ever was. And if you don't know who you are, it's really
yeah.
hard to walk with somebody else in life.
Church is a great place to hide sometimes.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
I hid in church a lot growing up, and I told myself lies. Like I didn't even realize it until I had hit rock bottom, that there were things pieces of ways that I identified
Hmm.
that really had shaped. Like, I don't know if have you ever done like 12 step work?
I haven't done 12-step work, but I've done a lot of identity work for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So there's part of the 12 steps where you do a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself, where you write down everything that you can think of that you have ever done to anybody to wrong them.
Hmm.
It's a pretty extensive process.
Yeah.
And like I worked through the 12 steps. I got to step 4 3 different times with 3 different people.
Hmm.
And that's where I got hung up, was working through all that stuff. And finally, the third time I did it was with my pastor.
Hmm.
And he's like, here, do it. Because he's got 28 years of drug and alcohol recovery. And he's like, don't do it like that. Do it like this. And in the end, so that's step 4. Step 5 is when you sit down and you read that to somebody.
Hmm.
And we went to the top of this mountain and we were looking over this huge valley, and I'm reading through this list, and I had identified three different things, 3 different words that I had always identified myself as, and that was a fat,
Hmm.
lazy pervert.
Hmm.
And I realized that that was deep seated in my identity, and everything that I did, regardless of what I was trying to do on the outside, those 3 words were what identified me on the inside.
Yeah.
And I didn't even do it consciously, but I had to start shifting those pieces of and I just assumed that that's what I was always going to be.
Yeah. And that's so like that's it. Like
Yeah.
that's the power in identity. And it was the same thing with me. I mean, I haven't done the specific 12 steps, but we've walked through those. I mean, I remember writing out to my ex-wife and apologizing for all the things that I had done and those things, and then sitting down with Jesus and saying, what are the lies that I believe about myself? And then I wrote like 25 to 30 things that I believed and then crossed them all out and put
Yep.
overcomer, 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 and then found scripture to what is the truth about who
Yep.
I am. And I remember some of those same lies that I believed about myself. And a part of me is like, you're not good enough. You're too much for people. You can't overcome things. You'll never be good enough. You can't do things for a long period of time. You're not consistent. You're not trustworthy. Like these were all the things that I had believed about myself. And so when I believed those things in marriage, I walked into those things in marriage because whatever we believe, we're going to walk into. And I think people will say all the time, "Hey, I believe this." Well, your actions actually speak much more than what you say on
Yep.
what you believe. Like, hey, I believe in you. Okay, well, if you believe him, then you're going to believe what he says. You're going to walk into what he says. And we say those things all the time. And a lot of times it's just our words. Our actions don't actually match what we believe about ourselves. I believe I need to be healthy. Well, if you believe it, then why don't you do it? And
Yep.
because you don't actually believe it, there's a lie in there somewhere that's keeping you from getting there. And it was the same thing for me as we were doing the same thing that you're talking about there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like to use this word because it's not really what I think it is, but karma's a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can put different words on it, but that's a pretty good way to understand it because it's just like you said. Like you can say, I told myself, I didn't call myself externally that I was fat, lazy, pervert,
Mm-hmm.
but my actions, the receipts, when you cashed in all the receipts, here I was. I was fat, I was lazy, and I had all these other underlying issues that were really more of what was going on. Like, and actions speak louder than words. And so,
Well, and what is, I mean, what is coping? Like this is the thing that I've really dug into in my own life because that's what I did. Is my whole life was a cope. Like any problem that I had, I was going to go to something to cope. And what is coping? It's believing that that thing is going to make you feel better than actually facing the pain and walking through the hard stuff. Because a lot of times, like coping will make you feel better in the moment. We wouldn't do it if it didn't. Like alcohol, porn, those things, like they feel good in the moment. I mean, they're
yeah,
terrible. They're terrible for you, but they feel good in the moment. But then
they do.
they lead to long term pain and long term suffering. Whereas in the moment, facing the issue, which is what I had to do and walk through, those 2 years were extremely hard. These last 2 years were not easy. But as you face it, you realize that the long term joy comes from that momentary suck. Like it's going to suck
Yep.
to face. It sucked to face. It sucked to realize that I broke up my marriage with my wife and I destroyed my son's world, like in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And God's worked some pretty cool things out of that. Like he's found Jesus in the moment of that, which is pretty crazy. But those things were reality and I had to face them. And if I never faced them, I would have still been coping to this day. But to face them has actually brought joy and brought redemption and brought restoration, which is what God will do.
So let's dig into a little bit more between like, how old were you when you got married and kind of,
Yeah,
talk a little bit about that.
I was 24 years old and just didn't, and she was 24 years old as well. And I think I just didn't know what I didn't know. I think you walk into these things and it was good for a little while. I would say
Yeah.
good. Like it was okay, but we didn't have a lot of stress. And really when my son was born is when things, and that was about 5, 6-ish years into marriage. And it wasn't because of him. I want to be clear there, but the stress
Yeah.
of a baby showed where we actually were and showed
Right.
because I think stress will show you where your loyalties lie. Because when
It
stress
shows the cracks.
yeah, when stress shows up, you start to see where you run to. And that's what happened in ours because 24, we get into marriage, we're going to church, we're doing all the things. But I actually thought previously, and I don't know if you want to go here, but I'm happy to, but like I thought porn will never be an issue in marriage because when I struggled with porn previously, whenever I was with a girl, it would go away because I just felt like that was wrong.
Yeah.
But what happens is as things go, this is what happens with coping is it just gets worse. It doesn't ever get better. And so eventually it showed up in marriage. And then when that showed up, it just things started to spiral and I didn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah. So like when I remember the feeling like when this girl who I have pledged my love to, that I am supposed to be 100% devoted to and in love with, finds out that I struggle with pornography, like it's got to wreck their world
mhm.
on some level, right? Even the wreckage it's already done to you and to me, right? When your significant other finds out about that, Like it's just gotta rock them in a way that, I mean, they know that men struggle with these things, but when they find out that it's the man that they love, like,
Mhm.
that struggles with this, it's got to just hit them in a spot we don't even understand.
Well, yeah, it's an incredibly vulnerable piece, and it breaks the trust. I mean, that the
Yeah.
trust is gone, and the saddest part about it, I think, in terms of those things, is it doesn't have to be that way. Like we can walk through these things and get past it, but not that it doesn't have to be that way in wrecking their world. It will wreck their world, and it should. Like it's not something that's good. But I think that more men struggle with this than let. I think it's 99% of men struggle with lust in some capacity because we
Yeah.
haven't been taught. I think a lot of things that have been taught out there is lust management, how to manage your lust rather than actually how to get to the root of the issue and how to follow Jesus in full sexuality, which we just think we got to deny it and denounce it and run away from it. And it's like, that's not what God calls us to in the fullness of what it can be. And so I think we can get this fear of women. I even put a thing on Twitter a couple weeks ago talking about how freedom from lust is not having accountability, not looking at porn, not masturbating, all those things. Freedom from it is being able to walk in a room with multiple beautiful women and your wife and not be afraid.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of men would walk in that room afraid because they're like, oh, I can't check.
Yeah.
I got to keep my eyes. I got, it's like that's what we've been taught is how to do that rather than like the root of what everything is and then being open and vulnerable. Because I think
Yeah.
most men will not share this. Sharing it on a
Yeah.
podcast is a little scary to
Yeah.
do, but I think even men won't even share it with each other very much. And that's the piece with any of these coping issues is we just go inside and we hold them in here rather than like, hey, I'm actually struggling with this and it's going to affect my marriage and it's going to make this not go where I want it to go. I need help. And,
Yeah.
and I think that's the hardest words for men to say is help a lot of times or
Yeah.
surrender.
And what a lot of people don't realize is, yes, you are dealing with a specific sin or coping mechanism, whether it's drugs, alcohol, porn, whatever it is. Yeah, you have to get rid of that specific thing, but the work that you have to put in to overcome that thing actually makes you a significantly better person than if you had never had to deal with it at all. Like, I'm a big fan of, even if you've never had drug, alcohol, none of those problems, right? But if you look at the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous or whatever, or like the coursework that you did, if
Mm-hmm.
you do that when you don't, before your life is in complete and total crisis, how much better would you be, going forward? That work is valuable to put in, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And well, and that's the thing is like, it's not really about the problem. Like that's
No.
that's the that's the issue. And I think a lot of times we get so wrapped up in, well, this is the problem. I got to face the problem. I got to make sure that this problem goes away. It's
Yeah.
like, no, you do, but if you go after the problem, like if your focus is the problem, your focus is not the solution, which is Jesus, and taking
Right.
the steps towards that freedom, then you're always going to be dealing with the problem because we're just
Yeah.
looking at what the problem is. And so if you do any of those programs like you're talking about 12 steps, like my big thing that I did in my life is go through the book Unwanted, which was really digging at the root of what sexual sin is.
Yeah.
And if you don't, when you start to dig into the root of one thing, it'll start to apply to other things, and you'll be able to realize that it's all coping. All of it's coping. Some people
100%.
cope in way healthier ways. Like there's people who have great jobs, exercise really well, and are coping their whole lives away through work and exercise and stuff. But it's just more positive.
Yeah.
And so
Or
that's
the gym or whatever it might be.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah. To go right along with that, I think that one thing that I've seen, the opposite end of that is something that I've seen people get into too, is where they're just constantly digging into the why,
mhm.
but they never actually end up changing the behavior.
Yeah.
So you
Yep.
definitely have to work on both things at the same time. Like, it's great to study about how to work out,
Mhm.
but until you actually go to the gym and apply that knowledge, or to study and learn everything you can about nutrition, but if you never apply that knowledge, studying all the ways to overcome coping mechanisms and dealing with all that past stuff if you never actually are like, well, yeah, now that I've done that, now I have to stop drinking.
Yeah.
Now I have to stop whatever it is. You can't have one without working on the other. And so they alone, then it's just a big mess. But if you combine the actions with the knowledge is when the real breakthrough happens, at least for me.
Yeah. Oh, and I 100% agree with you because I mean, that was me previously. I wonder if it was maybe you as well. In your story is I actually had a lot of knowledge in my head of the things that I should do
Yeah.
previously. I just took
Yep.
zero action in any of it.
Yep.
And it ties back to not believing it, right? Like I really didn't believe it, but my beliefs didn't change from them suddenly just changing. Like
Yeah.
I had to get to work. I had to put the
Right.
steps in. And I still remember when I surrendered back to Jesus and God being very clear, it's like, it's time to get to work. But he
Yeah.
asked me to do one thing first. He goes, I want you to spend time with me every day. That was the first thing that he told me to do. And so as I started to spend time with him every day, he's like, okay, now I want you to start going to the gym every day. And then after
Okay.
about a month of that, he's like, hey, I want you to start eating better. And these steps, I think when we take action, a lot of times too, we were like, okay, I need to change all these things. Okay, I'm going to take 5 to 10 steps of action.
Yep.
I'm going to do it for 2 to 3 weeks, and then I'm going to go back to the same place that I was. Well, if it's a long-term game and you're actually, okay, my beliefs has changed, I've surrendered, I'm going to walk into these new beliefs. Well, then there's no rush to walk into all of them at the same time. Like walk into one,
Yeah.
then walk into the other, then walk into the other, because momentum's a funny thing. Like as you start to take action in one area, it's going to bring up another area, and you just start to take those small steps of action. And I mean, I even had a piece in my process where it was going to get to that coping place again, where I was exercising all the time. I was losing all this weight. And then I signed up for an Ironman and was getting coached in an Ironman. And I was excited about it. I was doing it. And eventually it was just breaking me down in other areas that were starting to fall where I didn't want them to. I was real. I think I missed going to my son's school one week just for forgetting about it. And then I wasn't spending as much time with the Lord. And I was like, these aren't worth it for me. These values are in the wrong place. And I had to stop.
Yep.
And because that's what can happen when we make changes. I think there's a lot of dry drunks out there where
Yeah.
they're not drinking anymore, but they're just exercising all the time. And
Yeah.
and I think that those things can still happen if we don't get to the root of stuff to where we can actually
Yeah.
walk in the freedom of it as well. But we have to take that action to keep doing it.
In recovery circles, that's the difference between being sober and being in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So being sober means you're not drinking. Being sober, being clean means you're not using drugs, but you're just hanging on by your fingernails until you can get through the next temptation, right? Rather than putting in the actual work, which is what you're talking about, which is doing the internal and the external at the same time. But yeah, my journey was very similar to that. It started one piece at a time, and so now that's like the process. Like, because it's like you said, people want to jump in and do everything and fix everything all at once.
Yeah.
And then they burn out. Right. The system, the approach that God kind of like, without even, it's not like God was like, Andrew, he didn't like lay out this whole process.
Yeah.
But it started with a friend of mine inviting me to go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning, which meant I had to get up early and go to the gym.
Yeah.
And then we had a very specific regimented program that we were doing. Like so many sets, so many reps, which I had never really done at the gym. And so I actually started to see results. So I started to get up earlier. I started every day with discipline, getting up and then going to the gym and then actually working out in a very systematic, organized way. There's that Navy admiral that talks about getting up and making your bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember I had just moved into my own place again out of a recovery house. I was moved into my own place. And I was getting up early and going to the gym, but I was just rushing out the door and leaving my house. I set my alarm for 5 minutes earlier. I got up and I just made it a non-negotiable that every morning before I left my house, I made my bed. And I lived in a studio apartment. So like, it's really easy to get messy, but it's also easy to keep clean. So if you walk in and the bed looks like a mess, then the whole place looks like a mess. And so it was just, it set this mindset that if I would leave the house with my bed nicely made, and then I would come home at night and my place actually looked like someplace that, you wanted to come home to.
Yeah.
That was like 2018,
Hmm.
2019 maybe. And growing up, I've never been good at making my bed. But
Yeah.
now for the past like 5, 6 years, I've taken 30 seconds to a minute every morning and made my bed.
Hmm.
And it's like, it started with getting up early, and then I added making my bed, and then one piece at a time. And if someone went from like where my life was before or where your life was right at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and then saw your life now, they'd be like, there's no way. There's no way. How did you go from over here like that? And they're like, it wasn't like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't like that.
People don't realize that the shortcut is to do the work consistently,
Yeah.
because everybody wants the shortcut. Like now that I'm in the weight loss space a little bit, it's when I talk about, hey, this is actually going to be long term, it's going to take a while. Like I'll lose clients wanting to reach out because all they want is the diet and the exercise and how fast can I lose it. And
Mm-hmm.
I was the same mindset. So I'm not upset when I get this. I just look at it as that's not how you actually get results. And like the small steps over time create the big results. And it's that consistency over time that does it. Like I lost 100 pounds in 8 months. My goal was not to lose 100 pounds in 8 months. My
Yeah.
goal was to be healthy and fit for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And that happened was crazy. Like I did not expect that to happen, but people are like, man, 8 months, that's fast. Like, well, because I didn't set up for it to be fast. And
Right.
it's the same thing with the changes like you're talking about is making your bed. A couple of things for me that have been hugely beneficial is flossing every day, which
Same thing. Yeah.
Craig Rochelle actually talked about this in his book about change. I'm forgetting the title right now. I think it's How to Change, but pastor of Life Church. But he was talking about flossing. I was like, hey, I'm actually doing that. Like it was the same thing for me. I'm just doing that every day. And those small little actions, cold showers is another one for me. Like some people hate them,
Yep.
some people love them. But for me, what it does is I have to step into the hard. And so when I step into that, it actually helps me to make the other hard decisions. And
Yep.
it's just a small decision, but it helps the other ones. And I think that's the same thing with making your bed is when you make one small decision that you're going to do consistently, it helps you to be consistent in other areas as well.
Yeah. I don't think I've taken a warm shower in 2 years.
Yeah. There you go. So you're on the same framework. I like it. I
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I don't always take a long shower,
it.
but I just got so used to it. I was doing 75 hard,
Oh yeah. Yep.
and phase two of 75 hard is a 5 minute cold shower every morning.
Mm,
And that's part of it. And so I just started doing a 5 minute cold shower every morning. And then now a 2 minute cold shower doesn't feel so bad, you know? And so
yeah.
like I said, I haven't taken a warm shower, and it saves time because you don't have to stand there and wait for the water to warm up
That's
and then
true.
adjust the
That's
temperature
true.
all the time, you know?
Yep.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
you choose some of those difficult things. So up to that point, like you said, it was 3 years ago is when you, so
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the year or two when your ex-wife dropped that bomb on you,
Hmm.
was it completely and totally unexpected?
No. Yeah. Let me give that framework because I think this is an interesting thing in sharing this story because I think there's times where we just talk about the exciting things that have happened post, but there was a lot of pain that I caused in my
Yeah.
marriage. And I think we'd be remiss to not talk about that. And I just quit. I mean, that's the reality is I quit. And we got to this point where I didn't think it was recoverable. And that was the belief that I had. I didn't think that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I thought that there's no way that she's going to love me. There's no way that I'm going to be lovable. And then I acted into that. And I always say it this way. It sounds funny, but I always had her here and God here. And so when this started to crumble, this was my God. So when it started to crumble, instead of like trying to fix it all, which we did to a degree, like we went to counseling, we worked on things, all that stuff. But since this was always up here as the ultimate, when it started to crumble, I just shut down. Like my whole world was done. And what sucks in saying that is that like my actions didn't look like she was here in my actions. Because
Right.
whenever you put something above Jesus, you're going to sacrifice for that idol. But when that idol starts to crumble, Like it just shows where your allegiances lie. And so because that
Yeah.
idol was crumbling, I just ran to other things. Ran to
Yeah.
porn,
Same.
ran to alcohol, ran to
Yeah.
food. I was sitting there at night. She'd go to bed. I'd drink, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much whiskey and cokes and things that I was drinking. And then I'd order food in and I'd watch porn, like whatever it was that was going on. And that was the last, 6 months to a year of our marriage. And I treated her like garbage. I was
Yeah.
certainly emotionally abusive to her and, did not treat her well, blamed her for so many things. And so that piece of it eventually led to that day. And I didn't want to accept it at that point, but it was not unexpected. I deserved it. I should have been kicked out at that point. And it should have been this, like, that light switch. I wish it was that light switch, right? That goes on and says, oh crap, I messed up here. But instead it just drove me further because of where I was. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, this is going to sound really funny to say, but in a lot of ways, it was the grace of God because
Yeah.
he gave me enough opportunities to change previously and I didn't. And so he allowed me to get to my knees and lose everything that I ever wanted so that I could find him. I mean, he
Yeah.
wasn't lost, but so he could find me, I should say. And
Right.
that's the piece of it. When he did that, I mean, that's another piece of it is I had to take ownership. As men, we want to look at the other side of the street. One of my mentors who I love says, stop looking at the other side of the street. What she chooses to clean up is hers. What God's asking you to do is look at your side of the street. And it's a lot
Yeah.
more messy than hers anyway. So you need to clean up your side of the street, take ownership on your side of the street. And so I had to write her a couple letters. I wrote her a letter initially right after that word retreat, apologizing for all of the things that I had done and the mistakes that I had made, and handed it to her and told her she could rip it up. She didn't have to read it. It was the first time that I had actually asked for forgiveness without hoping we'd get back together. And then a few months later, I was at another retreat, and they during a breathwork session, actually, God spoke to me through a guy because I would always say when my son was like, "Hey, Dad, why aren't you coming home?" I'd say, "I wish I could. I would if I could." And he's like, "You got to stop saying that because you're blaming his mom by saying that." And I didn't even realize what I was saying. It's like, "I would if I could" says that she's the reason I can't, right?
Right.
And so I wrote her another letter and said, "Hey, I've been saying this. I didn't even realize it, and I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I'm the one who messed up. I'm the one who made these mistakes, and I'm sorry for, what I did." And it's hard. Ownership is hard. It
Yeah.
sucks. Like, but without taking ownership of the things that we did, we can't move forward. We have to take ownership of them. We have to accept them. Now, you don't live in shame from them, but you can't actually break free from shame without admitting them and being vulnerable about them and then taking that ownership. So,
I think in our culture, it's very difficult for people to admit that they're not perfect. And so I think that there's a big problem with people not getting called out for their sin,
mm,
right? Like like there's the scripture that says, first take the log out of your own eye before you help your brother take the splinter out of his. And so we've gotten to the place where, like, especially as men, this is one thing that I've noticed is as men, we live in so much shame, a lot of it due to the fact that, like you said, 99% of men struggle with lust and pornography, at least on some level, or
yeah.
have. So we think we have completely disqualified ourselves from being able to talk to people about difficult things. And so we think that since our lives aren't perfect, or that our lives are, we're not measuring up,
Yeah.
that we should just allow people to just get away with things. And so we won't call anybody else out because we're afraid of our own selves being called out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a big piece. Like, I don't know how you voted or how you viewed this last election, but like the one of the things that I talked about after the election was like it's time now for the men in this country, especially in this country, but around the world, but the men in this country to step up and become the type of men that we're supposed to be, so
Mm-hmm.
we can be the example to other people, so we can call people to higher standards. But we have to start with ourselves being, we're never going to be beyond reproach.
Yeah.
We're never going to be beyond, like, we're never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
But, like, if we can live at a standard that inspires people without a bunch of skeletons in our closet,
Mm-hmm.
that's what inspires people to do better. And that's what inspires, like, because we have generations of women who have looked at these weak men
Mhm.
who have lived in shame, and they're like, these men aren't stepping up. So we got to jump into these positions, and it's thrown the balance of everything so far off that we've kind of ended up where we are as a result of it, you know? And like testosterone levels are nosediving and fertility rates across the country, and all these things are happening. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that men have lived in shame for so long. At least that's my piece of my take on it. I don't know how you feel about that,
Well,
but
I agree with you in terms of men living in shame for sure. And I think that when they don't have someone to look to
mm-hmm,
that can show them the path of vulnerability, because men in the world, we're told to keep it to ourselves. Like we don't share emotion. We
yep,
don't get emotional. We got to be in control of our emotion. Well, being in control of no one can control their emotions. You're going to feel emotion, right? I hate
yep,
that. I hate that term. No one's in control of them. Emotions come and go. What you're in control of is your reaction to your emotions and
yep,
learning them so you understand them so that you can react in a way so that really you're not reacting, right? You can act in a way that's different. Like I actually had this revelation a couple weeks ago with my son to say change your actions instead of change your attitude, because
uh-huh,
we always want to change the emotions. It's like, no, those things will just come. We can't actually control, but the feelings do not dictate what we do,
yep,
and yet we can think they do and we act in those. And so, but the vulnerability piece, I had a mentor of mine say it this way, and especially when I was walking through some of the things I didn't want to have to walk through, and he's like, hey, you say that you want to coach men someday and you want to lead men, so everything that you walk through is something that you can walk somebody else through.
yep,
And so take that approach whenever you have to walk through something hard, is you're going to get to walk someone else through it someday too. And you can only walk people down roads that you've been willing to walk down. And a lot of times, I think the reason men aren't vulnerable is because they're also still living in that shame, like you talked about. It's like it's hard to call someone out when you're walking in that same shame. And the easiest way to call someone out is to say, hey, I did this stupid thing too.
yeah,
And I can see it in you. And this is the path you're walking. So walk with me this way, and I'm going to help you get out of that. That's how you call
yeah,
someone out, because you're really calling them up and not out, right? You're trying to get them to come up to a different level, but you can't do that unless you've actually done the work yourself and been vulnerable and shared those things and walk in freedom. And that's what freedom is surrender and walking in the vulnerability of like, hey, this is my story. It sucks. Like I destroyed my marriage. My son, has divorced parents because of the decisions I made, but look at the freedom I have now because of what God's done, and that
yeah,
it's worth it. And that vulnerability, I think I'll just say this real quickly, is vulnerability leads to vulnerability for other people and will actually bring connection rather than disconnect.
yeah.
And people think when they share their story, it's going to disconnect them from people because they'll be like, that's too much. It's like, no, it's not. It'll bring the right
I,
people into your life.
I don't know how many times where I've walked into a room and for whatever reason, God put it on me to share a vulnerable piece of my story.
Mhm.
And then pretty soon, all around the room, guys are like, me too,
Mhm.
me too, me too. Which is it's part of why I've had a couple of people comment, Andrew, you're so vulnerable with the stuff you talk about on your podcast. You talk about just the craziest. Like I was talking about how like the last time I saw my ex-wife, and it was just this horrendous gut wrenching situation.
Yeah.
And people are like, how do you share that? I'm like, well, I can't share the other stuff that I talk about, the inspirational stuff, though. Here's how you change your life if people don't see that I've been down the same path that they have, right?
100%.
I've experienced at least the same level of pain, if not more, than them, or at least on some level.
Yeah.
So I try to mix those two things. So I tell a story and then I tell a lesson, tell a story and I tell a lesson. And so that's kind of what's got me to where I am now. And, like the whole dangerous gentleman thing is like,
Yeah.
because the people who know me now would not have recognized me 8 years ago. And the people who knew me 8 years ago wouldn't recognize me now. And the
Yeah.
people who knew me before that time in my life would have never believed that my life would have gone down that road.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Same here.
So yeah, it's like I like to say that our past gets us to where we are, but it doesn't determine where we go from here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think we all have an option when our stories get rocked. And it's really to walk into the actual identity that we could have of who we are. And I think that we shouldn't be where we were 8 years ago, right? Or where we were 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It should constantly be evolving and doing that. I just think like mine's True Roots Identity, right? Dangerous Gentleman, True Roots Identity, like, but we're talking about the same things in terms of just
Yep.
identity and where it's placed and the beliefs that we have and the lies that we believe. Because I would argue or I guess that with you, like you weren't living into who you truly were 8 years
Oh
ago,
no.
and now you are.
Yeah.
And the
I'm
beliefs are
closer.
different. Yeah, you're closer. And we're never going to be there, right?
Yeah.
Sanctification is a lifelong process, and we're never going to arrive this side of heaven, but we can walk into the identity that he has and the call that he has for us. And that's really what's happened to me too, is why I look so different than I did 3 years ago when my wife said, "Hey, you need to leave," is because my beliefs are completely different. And now I'm walking into who God always saw me as.
Yeah.
He's always seen me this way. I just didn't see me this way.
Yep.
And
And
he's replacing those lies. Yeah.
the external transformation that everyone sees pales in comparison, I'm sure, with you as it does with me. The external transformation does nothing compared to what's happened on the inside.
Yep.
And the external is just like a shadow of what's gone on internally. It's still cool. It's still powerful. It's still where a lot of the story comes from. But like, you know, so little nuts and bolts. So how do you, when you start to work with a guy,
Yeah.
well, first of all, how did you go from like, hey, I've really changed my life. I want to also be able to now change other. Where did you go? How did that go? Because like it was a long process for me to make the changes that I made, and then to go, okay, maybe I can help other people now. So how did you make that
Yeah.
shift?
Yeah. I'll have to back up a little bit in that, but I've always been a coach at heart. I love to coach. I coached high school baseball for 4 years, enjoyed it. Wonderful time. I actually stepped down to try to save our marriage at the time but wasn't ready to mentally. But anyways, that's a longer story. But I coached for a long time and coached in mental performance with athletes with a local junior college here and did some of that work as well. And so I've always loved coaching. So that piece of me is just built in. I want to help. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. Like I'm just a helper. I want to do that. But in my story, it's interesting because God didn't allow it until the right time.
Mm.
And I wanted to do this about a year, probably 14 or 15 months ago. I wanted to start it. I just shared my testimony at a word retreat. So I went to a word retreat. 6 months later, shared my testimony at a word retreat, got discipled. And then I'm like, man, I don't have a job at this point. Like I want to just do my business. God's like, not yet. And he really used that year to solidify all the changes that I made. And so I ended up getting mentored. I got a job at a local jump rope company that actually ships all over the world. It's not local, but it's in town. And I got discipled by the boss that was there for a year. And he's still a mentor of mine, still someone that I talk to pretty much daily. I'm usually there at least 5 days a week in that office now. And so, but I got to sit across from him. So what we did every morning is we'd have a meeting about work with him and the production manager that was there, and we'd pray and we'd talk, we'd work through books together. And really it was just this year of getting mentoring. And he even said to me at that point, it's like, hey, you've got to let the business go. You've got to let what you want this to be go and surrender it. And I did. And so I actually during that year was like, Lord, I don't even need to do this ever. And so I let it go and was not going to do it. And then come summertime, he came to me with our local gym owners like, hey, we know you love to coach. Would you want to start coaching at the gym? And just the way that all those things worked out this last July, it was God was like, hey, I want you to start it now. I want you to do it now. And I was scared to death. Like I wasn't really ready to jump in at that point. I was actually fully giving it up and was hoping I didn't have to do it at that point because
Yeah.
it's scary.
I felt the same thing at times. Like, do I really? And I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I jumped in. July 15th was actually the first day of the business. And on July 15th, I got a client. And it was God going, hey, I told you to do this. We're going to do it. And I wish that was every day that happened, but but
Yeah.
but anyways,
Right.
yeah. So I've got to work with a few different clients, and working with a guy right now that's just making incredible progress towards freedom through the book Unwanted. And it's man, I really am like this with the business though. Like I just want to help men. I want to help men find freedom and be able to walk into their true identity, walk into who they actually are, and not be caught in these sin cycles for the rest of their life. And my passion really is for that Christian man who has accepted Jesus, but has no idea how to surrender and follow him. Because
Yeah.
I think there's this big disconnect of like, I'm going to go to church. I want to do the right
Yeah.
things, but we don't know how to walk in it. We don't know how to
Yeah.
walk in surrender day because surrender, that's freaking hard.
It is.
And
It is.
so that's where it is right now, and I'm just walking in it, and he's setting things up. I just recorded our first podcast this last week with a guy in town that I'm excited to release here in a couple of weeks, and we'll just see
Nice.
what the Lord wants to do. So
Well, that's super cool. Like, yeah, like that's kind of similar. The way I kind of really it cemented it for me was a couple of years ago. Like I've been going to this church for a few years, and they've seen me walk through this transformation. And so there was one of the guys who was a member of the church who was in a position of influence. He was the worship pastor, and he had a pretty significant kind of a meltdown failure and made some mistakes. And the pastor came to me and said, Andrew, I've seen how you changed your life.
Hmm.
Can you walk this guy through the same process that you walked through? And I was like,
Hmm.
it just hit me hard. And I started working with this guy, and he made some pretty significant progress. So we worked pretty consistently together for about 3 months or so, and he made some big strides in who he was as a person. And I was like, I guess I can help people.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
And still, that was a couple of years ago, and it still has taken me another couple of years to decide that this is something that I want to do on a more than occasional basis.
Yeah,
And like I actually want to help people consistently, and like men who are broken,
yeah,
mm,
yeah.
like who think that they're stuck where they are in their identity. I was born this way. I've always lived this way. I'm going to die this way.
Yeah.
I thought that, and so to be able but I had to walk through the process of like we talked about earlier. I had to change the internal, and I had to change the external. That's really where the power is. When I started to talk to you guys like you and the guy I've had on the podcast previously, it's like our journeys are so different, but the pieces of how to put your life back together, like they're so similar
Mhm.
across the board, and
Yeah,
they're simple, but they're not easy.
yeah.
And I know one of the things I like to tell people, and I'm sure that you've experienced this too, is that people look at guys like you and they're like, there's no way I could ever do that.
Yeah.
There's no way I could ever go from, and they look at your before picture and they look at your after picture and they think you're Superman. Or they just see you now and they see you doing muscle ups in the gym and they're like, I'm never going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
What they don't realize is that like a couple years ago, you were in there and you were the guy in the gym who was watching the guy doing muscle ups going, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was never the goal. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing too, is it was never the goal. And man, you are so correct. Like that thought process of I can't do that. Like there's no way. And here's the deal. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I would not be here when sometimes when people ask, they're like, how did you do it? Jesus.
Yeah.
And again, there obviously he had me do things, right? He had me be
Yeah.
obedient to walking in these different steps. But that's really what it is you fight through surrender. Like when a surrendered heart to the Lord, he can do anything with. Anything
Yeah.
with. A proud heart, he has a really tough time doing anything with. A surrendered heart, which is what I was before. It's like a surrendered heart. I'm a different person than I've ever lived for 30 I lived a certain way for 34 years of my life,
Yeah.
35 years of my life, and have now lived a different way for the last 2 years. And I'm going to continue in that because you, he can just do so much in that process. But I was that guy. I was the guy who said, I cannot do that. There's no way I'll ever get there. I never thought I was going to be at a CrossFit gym doing muscle ups. I was never like,
Yeah.
I just wanted I just wanted to do what the Lord asks.
Yeah.
And when you do what the Lord asks, you're going to walk in different areas that you never thought. I never thought I was going to lead a word retreat. I just got done leading the word retreat that I had surrendered
Wow.
back to 2 years ago. And I'm like, what God, like, why am I in this seat? What are you
Yeah.
talking about? Like, there's no reason I should be on this podcast. There's no reason.
Right.
And again, it doesn't mean that God's going to put you necessarily in those spots, but what he's going to do is he's going to use your story to help others, and he's going to get you to places you never thought you could get to in terms of freedom and just living life with actual joy and being able to move forward without shame. And there's just so many men that think that they can never get there, and I was one of those men. And you don't have to get there on day one. You got to shift that thinking, and you just got to take action. One step
Yep.
is
Yep.
all it takes to keep going.
That's the message that the world needs. That's the message that men need these days. So I think that's a good place we can kind of wrap it up.
Yeah.
So why don't I'll give you 1 minute
I'll do better this time. Do better.
to wrap it up, kind of like what your final 1 minute message that you'd like to share would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say this, that surrender to the Lord. Outside of that, none of this matters.
Yep.
And I'd love to pitch you on all of the things that I've done and all of the cool things that have allowed me to transform, but that's it.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't surrendered to the Lord, that's the thing to do, because that can change absolutely everything. Because when I say change your beliefs, change your behavior, change your life, which is the tagline of my business, it doesn't matter if you're not changing your beliefs to the actual truth. And the only truth that's going to change your beliefs for good and have you walk into who you truly are is the Word of God and His truth. And so
Absolutely.
surrendering to Him, if you just surrender, say, hey, Lord, I surrender. You have it all. And it's going to be daily. You do that, watch what He can do. He's going to do so many incredible things. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. You're going to give over your will, but it's going to be the best decision you ever made. And you're going to be able to actually walk in joy and freedom. So that's where I'm going to stop.
So where can people find you on social media and all that kind of stuff? And the name of your podcast, drop all the names.
Yeah. So the True Roots podcast is starting here in a couple weeks. So it'll start on, I want to say it's December 2nd. I believe it's the Monday after Thanksgiving is when we're going to drop our first one. So True Roots, and it'll be True Roots Identity on YouTube is where you can find that too. And then it'll be on Apple and all of those things as well. And then at abharris03 on Twitter, and then at True Roots Identity on Instagram are my other places that you can find me. So
cool. Well, it's been great talking to you, brother. Again, this is the Dangerous Gentleman podcast. If you're interested, we're going to drop Andy's links in the description. My links are down in the description. So if you liked what you heard today, give us a like, give us a follow, give us a share, and get the word out there, because there's lots of you out there, especially you men, who need to change your life, and it's possible for you. See y'all later.
thank you.
So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.